Good morning, welcome to EMTV. Many students are worried about the introduction of a second camera during home proctoring exams. The university wants students to use their phone as an additional camera to scan their room and hopefully prevent fraud. We will talk about this with student Robert Roch, University Council member Wouter van Dam and Chair of the Executive Board, Ed Bringsma. But first, news. Our student Iris Wolfs is going to the Olympics with her team. The Dutch water polo women qualified last weekend. Iris is certainly not the only student going to the Olympics. Do you want to read stories of the other students? Then go to erasmusmagazine.nl. On appeal, Gerson F. was sentenced to 4 years imprisonment and involuntary commitment. The man raped and almost strangled a woman to death, a young Earth student, in the summer of 2018. He initially received a sentence of 2 years. And most students will already know, despite the curfew, you are allowed to go out at night if you have an exam. However, you must be able to show proof of this. Otherwise, you are not allowed to go out on the streets between 9 p.m. and 4:30 a.m. And our campus is empty, but we can't work all from home. Our colleagues from Post and Logistics still have to work on campus. We paid them a visit to see how they handle our mail and packages during this pandemic. Welkom op de postkamer.
Hey, hallo!
Wij werken nu per dag met 2 mensen, Roy en ik. En voor de lockdown waren wij hier met z'n 5. Tijdens de lockdown van de Erasmus Universiteit mogen wij hier zeker nog aanwezig zijn. En graag zelfs, want de poststromen die blijven binnenkomen en gaan er ook uit. Echter is het wel zo dat het een aangepaste manier van werken is. Wij zijn uiteraard open voor afhalers, dus wij laten wel de mensen weten, onze collega's, dat er post en pakketten binnen zijn gekomen, maar echter mogen we helaas niet de campus op.
Hundreds of students protest against the use of a 2-camera setup during online exams. One of them is digitally here with me in the studio. His name is Robert Roch. He submitted an open letter to the Executive Board. Welcome, Robert. Your letter was signed by almost 800 students. So apparently you're not the only one with doubts and hesitations about this new system.
Yeah, well, I'm very happy to be here, indeed. I think it's safe to say that quite a few students supported my message, and I'm very grateful to those who undersigned my letter. I started writing the letter after the university announced the news to us that we will have to use the second camera during proctored examination. And they did so in an email actually containing just 1 paragraph with very little to no information about the details of the matter whatsoever. So I think naturally a lot of students started to worry, started to have concerns and complaints. So I thought it would be best to bundle these complaints into 1 concise letter towards the Executive Board and let them know that I think the vast majority of students disapprove of this intrusive policy.
Yes, because of course, when you're doing a proctored exam, you already have 1 camera facing you, mostly your webcam. What's your main reason, or what are your main reasons against this second camera?
Yeah, well, I think the range of issues that students have brought up is quite large, so I cannot address them all. So I will zoom in on some I find particularly problematic, and that is the technological complications and stress that this brings to students. I think there are 2 aspects to this. Firstly, some phones simply aren't supported by the Proctor exam application, which leaves students who are in possession of such a phone wondering whether they will be able to make the exam or not. But I think what is actually the larger problem is the connectivity issues. We've already seen in previous exam periods with just 1 camera of proctoring that over half of the students have experienced issues of such nature, and now we are essentially doubling the amount of video that we stream through our Wi-Fi network, leading to even higher connectivity issues. So we're adding more and more technology into the mix, allowing for more and more possible things to go wrong, and this of course leaves students really worrying about more and more things. So currently the university is just demanding a lot from us on a technological aspect, and this provides a lot of stress to students, and I think it's unreasonable.
Yes, and unfortunately, the executive board was unable to join us this morning. That is why I spoke with Chairman Ed Bringsma yesterday morning. I asked him why the board decided to use the second camera despite all the objections. Take a look. Why is the second camera necessary during exams?
This is because we received indications both from colleagues at other institutions and from Procter Exam itself that there was a certain hack of the system that could not be detected by the software as is, and we were advised to use a second camera to counteract on that particular hack.
Yes, because there was no sign of no indication at all of actually happening fraud at the Erasmus University, but still you fear fraud at the Erasmus University.
Yeah, but this is of course interesting with hacks. Of course, maybe at the end of the day, on statistical grounds, you could perhaps see that the results would be better, but there is no way to directly do that. And there were very serious and credible indications that this was a hack. And in fact, it was not with a very high threshold. So the indication was also that it would not be too difficult for the average user to use that hack. So that indication should suffice, because once you know that, you have to act to maintain the quality of the exams and of course also the quality of diplomas at the end. They're all linked to that. So once you know that, you must act.
But perhaps this is a weird question, but why don't you want fraud? What does it matter if it's perhaps only for a year with proctoring exams? They still have several more years to prove themselves, right?
Well, I would not want to enter the discussion where, either within our university or in parliament, we would have to concede that knowingly we accepted fraud in examinations because we were in COVID. That's a discussion you can't take. I mean, it is our duty to uphold the quality of our education, even in these times. And once you have the knowledge that this may not be guaranteed by the existing system, you have to take measures to counteract it. I mean, that's the only way you can do it.
Yeah. And of course, last summer there was an incident of fraud at the RSM. The faculty that don't use proctoring software. But did that incident play a role with this decision?
No, it did not play a role. In itself, we have schools that still need proctoring. And of course, then we have to maintain the quality of that kind of exam. It's good to know, and definitely I would encourage people to look for alternatives, which RSM did. But in itself, this did not, well, in the general sense that we're constantly monitoring how proctoring is going and etc. But for this particular incident, that played no role.
Because we're now almost, of course, a year after the first lockdown that's coming, that mark in history. But shouldn't we have all, passed on these regular exams if they're causing so much stress with students?
Yes, I think this is, so definitely I can say that also the board of the university would like to reduce the share of proctored examinations. I think we all see it's not an ideal solution, but we need it. So the particular solution that RSM found for their problems, going to open book examinations, is not a possible solution for every school at this moment. Also, I'd like to say we try to do alternatives. We made just recently an arrangement with Ahoy to have physical examinations, and then we find out that because of the curfew and because of the English variety mutant, we cannot take this decision. So rest assured that we are constantly looking for alternatives. And in fact, we would like to go back to more physical examination, but you see things happening. Now, for example, also with the riots, I mean, it may be that we don't want people to travel to campus or locations and we have to go online. So it's a complicated question.
The objections are coming now from various places. Hundreds of students signed a letter. There were questions asked in the lower house. How does it make you feel when you keep here, because you will have to keep explaining probably for a while now?
Yes, well, this is of course my position. This is more or less, of course, you could say what I'm paid for. So I do see the dilemma. I do see the dilemma. And let's put it this way. I hope that all the energy that is being released by this discussion, we can use it constructively to see that the proportion of examinations that we need proctoring for will diminish. This is, I think, a common goal. I think there is no so. And for the time being, where we do not reach that position, we simply have to find the best solution under the circumstances, which is the one I'm happy to explain. But I do confess that, of course, I would like to get rid of this system if we can, but we cannot as it stands.
And also with me here live in the studio is Wouter van Dam. He is a member of the University Council, and the Council also wrote an open letter to the Executive Board, and they are also very much against a second camera. Wouter, you heard Ed Brinksma just saying, once you know that fraud is going on, you must act. Do you agree with him?
I mean, we definitely agree that if you know that the fraud is going on, you have to act on that. But we feel that in the current decision making, the privacy and practical concerns that a lot of students have, as you've also said here and Robert has put out, aren't being taken into account and aren't being weighed correctly. So there has to be a point where you say, yes, we find the validity of exams of the utmost importance, but we have to weigh that against the stress and anxiety this is causing students.
Yes, and it's causing great anxiety. I hear it from students all over, even from my smaller sister who's still studying. Robert, you also heard Brinksma just state that education would deteriorate without the use of a second camera. Do you agree, Robert?
Well, I think there are two interesting things to notice. Firstly, we need a second camera, apparently because of failure of the proctored exam software, which puts students at a large disadvantage, apparently, now that we need the second camera of proctoring. But what I think is important to realize is that Erasmus University would be the only university in the Netherlands to implement the second camera. I think what we have seen universities around us do is we have seen them innovate and rethink the way they assess student knowledge. I think TU Delft has made a large shift towards open book examination, and it has worked out very well. So right now, students are just being there's being a large burden put on students by the executive board, and I think that's unfair. The Erasmus has a slogan, make minds matter. Well, I hope in this case they will make student opinions matter, because a university council cannot simply be ignored, and hundreds of students who disagree with your policy cannot just be looked away from.
No, and Wouter, you're the student representatives, and all 12 student members of the University Council are against and spoke against this second camera. Is there anything you can do?
There's definitely a lot of things we can do and we are already doing and have already done. We've asked a number of questions on more specific information on the percentage of exams that are being proctored, but also, for instance, what are the reports of technical issues. But most importantly, I think it's about the process and the procedure that is used to say that there is a necessity for this examination, because the line has always been that proctored exam should only be a last resort. But in practice, we feel, and a lot of students feel, that it isn't being used in that way. So we really want to push the executive board to make sure those alternative forms of examination are put forward more and more often. And that's what we have been doing and what we'll also be doing next Tuesday during our consultation meeting.
Yes, and this is of course nothing new, because you want more teaching assistants, more tools to create online assignments. And that has been the dream for, I think, many teachers here at the university, more help and more possibilities. But when I spoke to Brinksma, he seemed unwilling to change anything about proctoring. He said he would like it to be different, but it's difficult during these circumstances. Is there a way you can force change as a council? Just put your foot down. We're not going to do this. We're going to stop it right here, right now.
Well, there's a whole toolbox we have consisting of initiatives we can take and push the executive board to implement, but it's also about certain rights we have with regard to the regulations that are in place. So we're going to use everything we have there to make sure that we come to an equitable answer on this. And I think what's the most important thing here is that even if there would not be any formal steps we can take, in conversation with the executive board, there is a very real reason for them to also listen to this, because we're not saying this as just 12 students and 12 staff members in a council, but we're saying this on behalf of the whole Erasmus community. And I think that both teachers and staff throughout the entire university feel the need to really take action on this, because we see the stress and anxiety this is causing, not only for students but also for staff, and we need to take steps at this moment.
Yes. So do you promise to keep us up to date after your meeting on Tuesday?
Definitely, and I'd also like to say to all students, because we've had a lot of reactions from everyone, please keep doing that, because that's what we're here for, to make sure that your voices are heard at the highest level. And also, look at our social medias or our website to stay updated, because we really want to keep the whole community involved on this.
Yes, and of course also check out Erasmus Magazine, because we will keep you up to date on everything on this matter as well. Thank you, Robert, for joining us. Thank you, Wouter, for joining us. And although we were 24 hours early, also thank you to Ed Brinksma for joining us. And just before we finish, I have a grammar lesson for you by Hank Green. He hopes it will help you with your emails.
Is it for fuck's sake or for fuck's sake?
I'm so glad you asked, because this is fascinating. But first, we have to talk about for Christ's sake, which used to be a curse that people would say, and it was bad, and people would be like, ooh, it was for Christ's sake, like if you stub your toe. Because that was a curse back in the day, like a pretty big one, it was taking the Lord's name in vain, it was what we call minced. It was minced into other things. So for example, for crying out loud. Instead of saying for Christ's sake, you would fix yourself halfway through. This also happens with like fudge or gosh darn it. Mincing is a thing that happens all the time with curses, so that you don't actually end up saying the curse. But for Christ's sake got reverse minced. Eventually, for Christ's sake wasn't a big enough curse, so we changed it to for fuck's sake. And with for Christ's sake, the sake is possessed by Christ, so there's an apostrophe, so linguistically it is for fuck's sake with an apostrophe. I hope that helps you with your email.
Thank you for watching. EMTV will be back, and of course we will be back next Thursday at 9 a.m. And as I said, do you want to stay up to date in the meantime? Go to erasmusmagazine.nl.